Welcome to the Strange and Interesting Podcast, a show about folklore, the paranormal, urban legends, and pretty much anything else that I happen to find strange or interesting. I am your host, Al. And joining me today, I've got a guest, Kristina Bloom. How are you doing this evening, Kristina?
Hi, Al. I'm doing really well. How are you doing?
Oh, not too bad. Just trying to enjoy this lovely Wisconsin weather. Just glad that the snow is finally all melted. And
unless you're way up north and there's still snow coming down.
Yeah, I've got a friend who used to live about as far north as you can be in Wisconsin before you get into Lake Superior. I think it was like up in Ashland, and he told me how, they would sometimes get snow in like May or June. It's like, wow. I get depressed when we have snow in April, so I could not handle that.
Yeah, I totally get it.
So I met Kristina through a Facebook group, Strange Wisconsin, where it's for people who are in the great state of Wisconsin, where we talk about paranormal things, or people might show pictures of strange things they caught on a trail cam or that they saw in the sky. And I asked on that Facebook group for people who might be interested in being a guest on my podcast. And you said you would be interested. So why don't we start? If you could introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, I'd love to. I have been a professional psychic medium for the last 25 years. I have been psychic my whole life, but I went pro 25 years ago. And I teach metaphysical classes. I'm a speaker at different events, paracons. I do gallery readings, which is talking in front of a whole group of people, like doing readings for a whole group of people. Those are usually pretty surface readings. We don't go deep on those just because it's public, and I wouldn't want my laundry aired in public. I won't do it to anybody else. So, we just have the private sessions can go very deep. I travel around the country, and especially the state of Wisconsin, and a lot in Minnesota lately too, but doing psychic fairs, paracons, that kind of stuff. So yeah, I'm an author. I've got 3 YouTube pages. A lot going on.
Oh, so it sounds like you're definitely keeping yourself busy.
Yeah.
I mean, I have problems sometimes managing 2 YouTube channels. I can't imagine what 3 would be like.
Oh, sometimes it's just a confusing nightmare, but I somehow get there. I don't know.
So you said that you've been a lifelong psychic. So if we could take us back, when did you first find out that you had these psychic gifts?
It's been a story that I was told pretty much throughout my life. When I was just old enough to talk where I was understandable, I had a dream about walking into my grandparents' home office, but instead of an office, there was a lady in a hospital bed. And I climbed up onto a step stool and kissed her on the cheek and pulled a sheet over her head. And then I woke up crying. And my mom went the next morning, picked up the phone to call her mom. And at the same time, her mom was calling her. The phone didn't ring on either end, but they got connected. And it was a relative I didn't know at all who lived in Sweden, who had passed away at the same time I had the dream. Yeah. And then I had that same dream 5 more times maybe throughout my childhood. So yeah. And every time it was a relative I didn't know, but it was that the lady in the hospital bed is my great grandmother that I'm named after, but I never met her. She passed long before I was born.
So when you were growing up, you had these dreams. Did you have any other unusual experiences? Because a couple episodes ago, I did talk to a woman who's a medium, and it sounds like she also, when she was growing up, she had some interesting experiences. And the episode I'm going to be dropping this week, so it hasn't dropped yet, but I did an interview with another psychic medium who grew up in a haunted house, and it sounds like she had some interesting experiences when she was young as well. So other than these dreams, did you have any other unusual occurrences?
Oh, all the time. All the time. My grandparents' house was haunted. Way back when my grandfather, probably close to 100 years ago now, built his house, when they were digging the basement, they found all kinds of arrowheads and bones and pottery and all kinds of stuff. So that house was always haunted. The house that I grew up in mostly was also haunted, but never really figured out who it was. I mean, I think it was the lady who had owned it before my parents bought it. She had died in the bathtub of a heart attack. And the whole time that we lived in that house until I was, I think 12 years old, I never completely shut the bathroom door. I would leave it open a crack because I didn't want to be alone, with that door completely closed, like the whole time I lived there. So, I grew up in a haunted house. There was all of that kind of stuff going on. There was always something, and I'm claircognizant too. So I would just know things without knowing how I knew them. And when I was in about 6th or 7th grade, somebody just finally told me, stop being creepy. And I'm like, I don't know what you mean. Like, stop telling us stuff that you know, because we don't know how you know it and it's creeping us out. And I'm like, oh, can't everybody do that? I mean, when you're a kid and you can do something, you kind of assume everybody else can do it too. It didn't occur to me it was weird, I guess.
I can certainly understand that from your younger years, finding it unusual that, wait, you mean not everyone else is having these visions or these dreams or, has these abilities. So do you think that everyone is born with psychic abilities? They just have to develop them? Or do you think it's something that only certain people have?
I think it's something everybody has to some degree. I think it's stronger in some people. The book that I wrote, Intuitive You, Psychic and Personal Development, is definitely based on the idea that everybody at the very least has intuition. Everybody gets a gut feeling. Everybody sometimes gets goosebumps and don't know why. Everybody has thoughts pop into their head. They don't know where they came from, so I think that that's a pretty common thing. I just think a lot of people don't know how to recognize it or don't understand what it is. Maybe, I'm not sure, but I think that, it's kind of our GPS in getting through life is that we have something that tells us, hey, don't go down that road. That's dangerous. Or, you might want to stop right here, or that person's probably not a good person to talk to right now, or, something like that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I certainly understand what you mean, how, the whole gut instinct that people have where it might actually be just a psychic ability, or I don't know, a message from a spirit guide or something like that, but they don't understand it at that point. And they just think, okay, I've got this unusual feeling, so I'm not going to trust this person, or I'm not going to do a certain action.
Absolutely. Even as much as like you always go home from work the same way, but one day you get a gut feeling to go a different way. Well, you were probably saved from an accident or a traffic backup or something. So yeah, it's a very practical thing.
So once you came to this realization that you had these psychic gifts, how did you go about developing them?
That's really a good question, because I looked for a teacher and I couldn't find one. Like at the time, I think it was that long ago. It wasn't all that common for people to talk about it, even when they had it, they just didn't talk about it. So I think probably the best way that I went about it was I got into Reiki training and was trained as a Reiki master, which opened up a lot of channels of energy. And then when I was working on people, I was getting information for them. And I think that was my inlet to really developing it consciously and intentionally. And then I have people starting asking me questions like, how do you do that? I don't know. I just do it. So then I had to go into learning how to explain how I do it, which is where the book and the class Intuitive You came from.
Now, what exactly is Reiki? I've heard of it, but I'm not really sure what it is. It's not something I've really looked into.
Okay. Reiki is a method of energy healing. Basically, you're given geometric symbols that are kind of sealed into your hands and your third eye and, different chakras. And it's basically just opening up energy centers. Let's say if I was going to give you a healing, I would put my energy towards you, or I don't actually have to touch you, but put my hands towards you. And then whatever you need is drawn through me to you from the universe. It's like a healing energy that comes through me. Anybody who's doing Reiki or in any type of open channel healing like that, they're not using their own energy. They're using universal energy, but they draw it through themselves, which means that the person giving the healing also gets a healing.
Okay. So you also are a spiritual advisor. Could you describe your work as a spiritual advisor and like what you do and what type of services you provide?
As a spiritual advisor, a lot of it is psychic reading. A lot of it is the intuitive information that comes through. It's kind of combined with like a spiritual counseling. I am an ordained minister, and it's a combination of those types of things where it's a more of a conversation than just, flipping tarot cards or whatever. It's more of a conversation between myself and the person and my client, where we're having a conversation, and I can bring up ways for them intuitively to look at things maybe differently and get a different perspective on what's happening that they're asking about. So it's a combination kind of psychic advising or psychic reading and counseling, sort of, but like spiritual counseling. I'm not a master's level therapist, but I'm a spiritual counselor through the ordination.
Now, and I did see one of your YouTube videos, and you talked a little bit about spirit guides. So what exactly are spirit guides? And I mean, are they different from things like land spirits or elemental spirits? And I mean, do you work with those types of spirits as well?
I do, but let me go back to spirit guides first. We are all born with one or two spirit guides that are with us. They come with us through our whole lives. They're just there for their whole lives. And they are kind of our basic guide. They're the ones who help us with the intuition. Maybe they're the ones who give us the gut feelings or the sudden knowings or whatever it is. And we have other spirit guides that help us with different things. I call them task-oriented spirit guides that can help us throughout our lives with different things. We also can have protection guides. Some of us needed a lot more physical protection than others. So some of us have protection guides whose only job it is to like a kind of like a guardian angel, I guess some people would call it, where they step in and prevent people from getting hurt. Like you've heard of people having really bad car accidents and walking away without a scratch, that kind of thing. In my world, that is a guardian or a guardian angel, something like that prevents you from getting hurt. So there are different guides, different spirits that help us with different things. Land guides, land spirits, did you say that?
Land spirits.
So like ghosts or that kind of thing?
Well, at least more the way I've always understood them, because I've read a lot about stuff about Norse religion and Norse things. And I know in Scandinavia, they often talk about land spirits like elves or dwarves that are said to inhabit certain land formations or certain areas of land. And one thing I read about that was interesting, and okay, this is a little off topic, but there was actually among the Aboriginal Australians, there was actually a belief among some of those groups that when the area where you're born, you actually are believed to have some sort of spiritual responsibility for that particular area. So it's almost like even though you're not a spirit, you're still somehow connected to the land where you're born. So, okay, that was a little off topic, but I thought it was interesting.
I don't know if it's that far off topic, actually, because, we are talking about land spirits. And I do work with them sometimes, especially probably fairies more than anything else. Sometimes gnomes, elementals. I've worked with some elementals. Yeah, it just really depends on what we're talking about doing. Like I've worked with elementals with weather, working with weather, calming storms and that sort of thing. I'm trying to think of what else, because I haven't worked a lot with elementals and with, they're not cryptids. What are they? They're, fairies and gnomes. Oh my gosh. What is the word I'm looking for? I can't think of it. What is that word?
Not land spirits, not elemental spirits.
Fairies, gnomes, sylphs, mermaids, they all kind of fit into that category. And I can't think of what
Fae?
that's called. Fae. Thank you. I don't
The
know why
Fae
I
or
couldn't think of the
fairies?
word Fae. Well, Fae, my understanding, and I could be wrong, but my understanding is that Fae is kind of an umbrella term for all of those things. So I could be wrong, but I think it's most commonly switched out with
Okay.
fairies.
Yeah, because usually when I think of Fae, I admit I tend to think of more like the Tinkerbell from Peter Pan, but I know that, there's different types of fairies, and at least in some of the Irish legends I've read about, they weren't always very nice.
No, fairies can be tricksters. And Tinkerbell could be a trickster too, if you remember the story.
And it's funny, we have a corgi, and in in English folklore, they believe that the markings on a corgi's back were from saddles that fairies would put on corgis so they could, ride them into battle and stuff. So whenever our corgi keeps wanting in and out, we always joke, oh, a fairy must want a corgi ride.
That makes sense. I mean, in my world, that makes sense. Corgis are adorable. I used to have one too.
Now, with getting back to the topic of like the spirits, so how did you first learn how to work with these different types of spirits, whether it's spirit guides or animal spirits or, fairies or elementals?
I started working with my spirit guides more directly when I started learning about my own heritage, my Native American heritage, and participating in ceremonies, going to sweat lodges and that sort of thing, and really just connecting with my spirit guides that way. I mean, it seems like such a long time ago that it's almost hard to remember exactly how that conversation started. But it turns out my main spirit guide has been one of the spirits that was in my grandparents' house. But I didn't realize it was my spirit guide for years. It's just, I seem more connected to him when I was there. But, I think it was probably, getting more in touch with my ancestry and my heritage is really where I started working with them.
Now, how are spirit guides different from ghosts? I mean, were they ever like a living person, or are they spirits that have been around since, forever?
They can be both, but normally our spirit guides, at least our main spirit guides, won't be somebody we knew in this lifetime, because they wouldn't have been able to come in with us when we were born if we knew them in this lifetime. So, sometimes it can be ancestors we didn't know. I never really researched whether mine were ancestors of mine or not. I just trust that they're guiding me, and we have committee meetings, and sometimes I get into trouble, so they call a committee meeting, and then we talk about it. So, it's interesting because I think I have a more active relationship with my spirit guides than a lot of people do, but I choose to do that. So
what is the purpose of spirit guides? Do they mostly serve a protective function and then an advisory position as well?
Usually both. Yeah. And you can have different spirit guides that do different things. So, the function of a spirit guide basically is to help us navigate being human. And so it seems like most of them have at some point been human, or they wouldn't know really how to guide us. But I think that we also have some spirit guides that probably aren't human or never have been. I have my protector, my guardian is a Bigfoot, and I've known that my whole life, ever since I was a little kid. And he protects me. He keeps me from getting physically injured, even when I'm in a position where I could have been seriously or even killed, where he protects me and takes me out of those dangerous situations, or creates a buffer, like in a car accident, for instance, creates a buffer where I don't get hurt, even if the car is demolished.
I do remember reading a book about shamanism years ago. I mean, I was still back in college, so this would have been in the 90s, and the author of it, and I think it's called The Way of the Shaman. I do not remember the author's name, but I think it was that book. He mentioned the part of the purpose of spirit guides is also to help protect from disease. And in some native tribes, it's believed that if you didn't have your spirit guide or an animal or not a spirit guide, if you didn't have an animal guide or an animal spirit, you wouldn't survive past childhood, because they were supposed to help protect you from both physical diseases as well as spiritual dangers. Now, in your particular tradition, is that belief present there as well?
I feel like that's more of an individual belief. Some people believe that. Some people, I don't know. I mean, I know what my animal totems are, but I think, again, for me, it was protective because it kept people who wanted to hurt me away from me. And I mean, I know that sounds like a weird thing for an adult woman to say, but I grew up in a violent environment. And so I had protecting guides who basically kept me alive to into adulthood so that I could do what I came here to do. So, I love this. My spirit totem is a skunk. No, people don't mess with skunks. You know, other animals don't mess with skunks, you know? So, you wouldn't necessarily think of a small animal like that as a protector, but people don't want to get close to that.
That's true. 'Cause I mean, I know, at least I know for me, when I see a skunk in the wild, I definitely give them plenty of space.
Oh yeah. You give them a wide berth for sure.
Though from what I understand, those generally they don't spray unless you really get close to them, because they want to, they only have so much. They want to save their musk or whatever it's called. They want to save that for like, if they absolutely have to do it. But still, yeah, I definitely prefer to not risk getting sprayed by one.
Exactly. Plus it takes them, I think, what was it? I read like 15 hours to refill, basically. Like it wears them out. It just exhausts them. They don't want to spray without absolutely having to. So yeah. Speaking of going off topic.
So if someone wanted to learn how to work with spirit guides, what's a good way to go about learning how to do that?
Usually in a meditation. I have taught people by taking them through a guided meditation to introduce them to their spirit guides. Sometimes, like if it's at an event where there's a lot of people around and getting someone into a meditation isn't real easy, I can introduce them to their spirit guides just by, I'll connect with them and then introduce them to their spirit guides, give them a name, a description, and then, kind of coach them how to work with that spirit guide.
It's funny, again, getting a little off topic here, but there's a post that goes around Facebook every now and then. It's a picture of an angel statue that's got like its head. It's like, it's bowing its head, and it's got its disappointed look on its face. And it's like actual picture of my guardian angel. And it's the caption's like, what did that idiot do this time?
Yeah. Definitely. I'm pretty sure my spirit guides spend a lot of time going, oh, why?
Okay. So usually the best way to get to know your spirit guides is to enter some sort of meditation and just kind of go with what comes to you. Or do you also recommend looking for like things in day-to-day life that might seem unusual or strangely timed? One book I read, and I don't know if it was Way of the Shaman or not, but they were mentioning like if you wanted to try to determine what your spirit animal is, usually the best way to do it is look for unusual signs. Like, for example, if someone, sitting next to you at like the bus stop starts talking about tigers, or maybe you're waiting for an appointment at the doctor's office and there's a TV show on and there's a documentary about tigers that comes on, or maybe you're, just in a store and you see a really cool tiger product that catches your eye. That might mean that, okay, maybe the tiger is your spirit animal and you should try to look into that. Is that a way that someone could try to learn about their spirit guides and how to work with them?
Oh, that's definitely one way. I think for me, well, what I did was I passed tobacco to a native elder and asked them to find out what my spirit guide was. And passing tobacco is a way of, it's an honoring and a way of asking. And then they just take the tobacco and toss it in the fire with a prayer, and then give it to, when it comes to them, then they let you know what your spirit animal is. So that's the way that I did that. I've also, when I do spirit guide readings, I often see the animals first. So then I can let people know, like I see a hawk with you, or I see, I don't know. Every once in a while I meet another person with a skunk, and then I get really excited because it's pretty rare.
Are there any other like really unusual spirit animals you've seen?
Let's see. Well, I've seen a badger. That's not real common. Hawk is pretty common. Eagle's pretty common. Falcons are pretty common. Deer and bear are pretty common. But that might just be, like where I am, like where I'm located in Wisconsin, because those are common animals around here. So maybe it's because that's the animals that they're around. I have seen tigers and jaguars, gazelles. What was that one that was really strange? It was some kind of a zebra, I believe. But it wasn't like a normal looking zebra. It was, what do they call that? It's a cross between a zebra and a donkey. I don't know if you've seen the
Not sure.
or something. Yeah. There's actually somebody in Wisconsin who breeds those, but, or at least used to. Like sea animals, I don't see a lot around here, but when I do readings on either coast, I tend to see whales or dolphins or, that kind of thing too.
Because I remember back in my college years, I was talking to my roommate because he also had an interest in, folklore and stuff like that too. And, we were talking about spirit animals, and he was always wondering, why is it usually whenever people talk about their spirit animal, it's always something like a bear or a wolf or, a tiger or a lion. And you never see someone who has like an earthworm or a caterpillar as a spirit animal.
I have seen people with a mouse. I can honestly say I've seen dragonfly. So if we're talking insects, that's the only one I've ever seen. But that's just my experience. Other people could have different experiences too.
Yeah. And it makes sense what you said about how, here in Wisconsin, it would be common to see people who do have like a bear or a wolf or a deer as a spirit animal, because those are animals that are indigenous to our state. But it would be unusual to see someone with like a shark or a whale. But you go to like Hawaii or somewhere on the Pacific coast, it would make sense that you would see people there who do have those animals as their spirit animal.
Right. Well, unless they moved here from one of those places, and then they might keep their same spirit animal. But typically a spirit animal has similar characteristics to what you do. Right. So bear in my tradition is known as the healing clan. So typically people who are doctors, nurses, energy healers, that kind of thing, they typically have bears because bears are healing clan. People who are spiritual seekers often have deer as a spirit guide, because the deer is considered, believe it or not, the hunter clan, which is actually the seeker clan for spiritual seeking. Really protective people tend to have wolves. People who are able to remove themselves emotionally from an emotionally charged situation and look at it from the outside, they tend to have hawks for spirit guides. So, people who get messages, in really strong psychic messages and stuff, it can be raven, crow, owl, that sort of thing, because those are considered to be messenger animals. So it's kind of folklore and practical mixed together.
And I think one thing that might be, I'm trying to think of the best way to say it, but I mean, I know, of course, different cultures have different interpretations. Like, for example, I mean, I've always seen the owl as a symbol of wisdom and knowledge, but I've heard that there's some places they actually see it as a symbol of death or, something other than knowledge or wisdom.
Right. So there are some cultures that see it like an omen of something difficult coming, maybe a death, maybe some sort of an accident, or, like a foretelling of something to watch out for. And I think that comes because owls can have really good night vision. they can see in the dark. So the thought behind that is that if they can see in the dark, then they can see ahead to things that we might not be able to see. But I like the
That's
wisdom
interesting.
thing too.
Yeah, and I think it's just because back when I was younger, I read a lot of Greek mythology, so that's probably why I personally would associate, the owl with wisdom or knowledge. But what you said makes sense to me, how, because of their excellent vision, that, you could certainly see that as an omen because, well, the owl has better vision than us. It can look ahead.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a thought behind that one.
Now, when I was browsing your website, I noticed you mentioned the Akashic Records, which is something that I've heard about. A friend of mine and I talked about it many episodes ago, but only very briefly. What exactly are the Akashic Records and how do you work with them?
The records are the records of everybody's soul. They're the records of all existence. The records of, it's an energetic record basically of everything that ever happened, is happening, or ever will happen. So it's, some people call it the Akashic field. My way of dealing with it is I see it like a library, like a giant expansive white library, kind of the Library of Alexander, what I would imagine that would look like. That's how I see the record hall of the Akashic Records. And so when I go to check a record, whether it's mine or somebody else's, I meet my librarian. We all have one in the way that I work with it. We all have one. And I meet him at the door. And then I tell him, like, if I was going to I was going to check your records, if you wanted to find out something that was in your records, then I would give him your name and he would take me to your room in the library. And everybody has numerous volumes of records for each soul. So then I would just ask your librarian to help me answer your questions. And when we were done, then I meet my library who guides me back to the front door because the place is huge and I get lost in there. So, that's how I do it. Sometimes I can literally read it. They are written in light language. So there has to be some translation because I don't know light language. I don't know how to read it or speak it without channeling. So that's how I do it. And then I bring the information back to you. That would be if you want me to do the reading. If you want to actually go in, I can guide you in through guided meditation, hypnosis, whatever. We can go in together and you can, look at your own records, meet your own librarian. So that's the way that I do it. Some people go out onto the Akashic field, which they explain looks like a grid. For me, that's too expansive. Like I can't really grasp information from that. I don't know, books work better for me, I guess.
Yeah, there is something about having that, physical item in your hand that I think connects you better with it. And I'm a big fan of Dungeons and Dragons and other role-playing games. And I know there's a lot of people that like to go to the PDF or the electronic versions, but yeah, I'm one of those guys. I always prefer the physical copy whenever I can get it. Just something about being able to hold it. And I think with those physical products, sometimes there's certain memories you have attached to them. Like, okay, hey, that's the pizza sauce stain in my handbook there. So from that, one sleepover I did at Joe's house or something.
Yeah. 35 years ago. Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
That's actually about how long I've been playing Dungeons and Dragons. So
that was a guess. There was one more thing I wanted to mention about the Akashic Records, if you don't mind. We can have the opportunity to look at what did we agree to in this lifetime? Like, what is our lifetime contract? What are the things we wanted to experience? What are the feelings we wanted to experience? Who are the people that we are going to maybe clean up karma with, or we wanted to get back together with to do something that didn't get finished in a past life or whatever. And at that point, this is where people can make really major life changes, because if they feel like they have accomplished whatever point that was, I just hand them the book and an imaginary quill, and they can cross it out and initial it with the date. And then as of today's date, that contract is ended. So that is something that we can do when we go into the records.
Is there any belief as to how the Akashic Records began, or is it just one of those things that's believed to have been around forever?
I think it's just been around forever. It never occurred to me to ask where it began because I don't think that there's a beginning or an ending. I think it's just is.
And how did you first learn about the Akashic Records?
In a meditation. It probably happened in a class somewhere along the line because I learned more from teaching classes than I ever did from taking classes. So, and I probably learn more than my students do in any given class, but I have students who like to challenge me. And so they will give me a topic, and then the next time we meet for a class, and I used to do this weekly for a couple of years, and that got to be a lot, but, they would tell me, okay, next week we want to learn about dragons. Well, if I didn't know anything about dragons, that gave me a week to figure out how to teach about dragons. So, and I think that's just how it came about.
Yeah, because I actually have a degree in religious studies, and one of my professors, very, very interesting man. I've talked about him several times on my podcast, a gentleman by the name of Dr. Wendell Charles Bean. And unfortunately, I heard he passed away a few years ago, but he was one of those professors that was really good at making you think. But not only that, he also encouraged us to challenge him. And I think that that's definitely a mark of a good teacher when you don't take this attitude that, I'm the teacher. Everything I say is the law. Everything I say is gospel. No questioning me. He actually liked it when we did come up with questions that did give him pause and did make him think. Wonderful, phenomenal professor. And
yeah,
he always had an interesting interpretation of religion. Even though he was an elder in the Methodist Church, and I believe he also was ordained as a Baptist minister, he described himself as more a practical mystic. And his view of religion was interesting to me. He viewed the world's religions like different paths up a mountain, where you look at them at the base, they look like they're very far apart. But if you look at it from above, once they start getting closer to the summit, then, you start to see more parallels between them. And you start to see that sometimes all these world religions, sometimes they have more in common than people like to think they do.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that. I've heard that theory before, that, it's different paths up the mountain. And that always made sense to me because the basic tenet of any religion I've ever studied was love. That's the base.
Yeah, the whole, the treat others as you want to be treated. I mean, it's been phrased different ways in different religions. So now, have you ever done any paranormal investigation?
Yes. Yeah, a lot of them actually. I am a member of a paranormal investigation team that's located in upstate New York. And I was a member of Whisper in Washington State. I've done a lot of paranormal investigations, just, not on my own because I don't do it by myself. I just, I like a buddy system just for safety. But yeah, I've done a lot of paranormal investigating.
Do you have any interesting stories that you'd like to share from your experience as a paranormal investigator?
Sure. How many would you like?
Well, if you just want to share one,
Okay.
One story before we end for today.
Yeah, that would be good. When I would belong to Whisper in Washington State, I was on the second team that went through. They did, it was a huge investigation team. I don't know, like 300 members or something, but I was on the second round of psychics that went through, and it was at a place where there was a history of mass murder. And there was a doctor that was starving people to death. And so that one was really interesting to me for a couple of reasons. First of all, it was the first one I had done with both a tech team and a psychic team. So they were kind of, the tech team went in first and set up all the tech. And then we went in with the intention of clearing everything out because they were going to knock the building down. So we wanted to release all the souls that might be stuck there on the property. And it was really, really creepy. In the basement, the building had a dirt floor, but there were cages where people were kept if they misbehaved. And yeah, and it was,
Wow.
yeah, it was really weird. But we opened up a portal to allow spirits to go through, to go into the light. And then we had some drums and we were drumming and chanting. And then we walked through the sanatorium and we were drumming and just saying, anybody who wants to go, the portal's open. There are angels to help you go to the light. There are ancestors to help you go to the light. Strong native component there prior to that, where there was thousands of years of people dying on that land, basically. And it was just really interesting because I have the ability, I'm visual. I have the ability to see, and I could see people like going up this staircase that kept getting bigger and wider as more and more souls were going. And some souls would reach a certain point and then they would turn around and help the souls behind them as they were going up. And it was just a beautiful, beautiful thing to watch. So that's a really memorable one for me.
Yeah, I can certainly understand that. And it's, mental asylums. It's like, I've seen so many paranormal investigation shows where they're always investigating it. And it's sad when you hear about how there were places where the patients there were treated a little better than, an animal that was about to be put down. So it's sad when you hear about that. And I can understand how it's common for those places to be haunted because of the negative energy that probably accumulated in that place.
Yeah. And it wasn't even a mental asylum. It was a sanatorium where this self-proclaimed doctor convinced rich people that she had a cure for everything through fasting. And what she did was starve people to death. And just before they died, she would have them sign over their everything, their belongings, their money, everything to her right before they died. And then she was doing autopsies on an ironing board in the bathroom. And it was just, yeah, it was some icky energy.
Yeah, I can imagine. Now, just out of curiosity, are you familiar with the stone tape theory?
I've heard of it.
Basically, the stone tape theory is a theory that sometimes when you have a lot of negative energy or negative events that occur in an area, that energy builds up in materials like stone and brick. And then sometime eventually it gets played back, like a video recording. And it's supposed to be, it's one of the theories I've heard to explain paranormal events. And I think it was supposed to explain why they tend to be common in older buildings because they tend to have more stonework and more brickwork than modern houses do. So I was just curious if you were familiar with that theory or if it's something that you've ever looked into.
I've never really looked into it, but it makes sense. It makes sense. I mean, just like, when you go to areas where there's a lot of quartz naturally in the landscape or in the mountains, in the hills, whatever, that they tend to hold a lot of energy too, because quartz is known to do that. And, it makes sense to me. And I kind of feel like the whole earth is potentially haunted. I mean, spirit can be everywhere. There probably isn't one square inch of earth where somebody hasn't died at some point, so the possibilities of the whole planet being haunted, that just makes sense to me.
Well, I'd like to thank you for joining me today, Kristina. Definitely had fun and had an interesting conversation. Before we go, are there any social media links or websites you'd like to share?
Sure. You can find me on Facebook, Kristina Bloom, Spiritual Advisor, or the group, Your Spiritual Advisor, Kristina Bloom. Let me see. I'm Instagram. I'm Kristina Bloom SA. Blue Sky is kbloom 2024 at bsky.socials. I'm on TikTok. Kristina Bloom 3, I think it is on TikTok. Threads is Kristina Bloom SA. So yeah, I'm kind of all over social media.
Okay. And I'll be sure to include some of those links in the show notes if anyone wants to check them out. So
Awesome.
Once again, I'd like to thank you for joining me today, and Thank you everyone for listening, and until next time, stay strange and stay interesting. You have been listening to a presentation of Point of Insanity Game Studio. Visit us on the web at www.poigamestudio.com. Follow me on most social media sites at POI Game Studio, and check out my music channel on YouTube at Al Seeger Music.